I have with me today Scott Ritter, former Marine and UN weapons inspector, to talk about the most up-to-date information on Russia, Ukraine, Zelensky, and Putin. Scott Ritter, thank you so much for coming on today's show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So the news, there's a new theme in the news, and that is that Ukraine is basically ready to take the war offensively into Russia. Do you think that this is going to backfire? Is this the right move for Ukraine to defend itself and try to put Putin on his heels? Or is this going to backfire with 10 Ukrainians dying for every one Russian?
I mean, what we're talking about here is the drone strikes that have been taking place in Moscow and other areas of Russia. These are militarily insignificant drone strikes, so we can't speak of taking the war to Russia, so to speak. I think the Ukrainians have come straight out and admitted the purpose of this. It's not to, blow up a defense factory or to, kill Russian soldiers. It's to make the Russian people, especially the citizens of Moscow, experience what they say the Ukrainians are experiencing, the attacks. And I understand viscerally what the Ukrainians are saying about it, except the following. They've just admitted to a war crime because it's a political objective, not a military objective. There's no legitimate military purpose for this. The purpose is to instill fear in the hearts of the Russian population using random violence. That's the definition of terrorism. If somebody did that here in the United States and got arrested for it, they'd be prosecuted as terrorists, not people, carrying out legitimate, military operations. So, there's the problem is that this isn't going to achieve what they wanted to achieve. First of all, I was just in Russia, and I'll testify firsthand that the Russian people, while they're going to be concerned about this, as anybody would, any sane person would be concerned about drones impacting on high-rise apartments in any city that they lived in. They're not going to be intimidated by this. The Russian people are solidly behind the Russian leadership, the leadership of Vladimir Putin, the president. They support the objectives of the Russian government in this special military operation. And they believe that this conflict needs to go until which time Russia prevails. They recognize this as a struggle of existential importance, that they can't lose this war. So having a couple drones pop off, it'll scare some people, but it's not going to intimidate anybody. And so the answer is it's going to backfire, because what's going to happen now is not only are you getting the opposite reaction that than you wanted. So you're failing. You haven't terrorized these people into submission. You've terrorized them into anger. You've doubled their resolve. You made them more resilient. And there's going to be consequences. The Russian government has always said that if Russia has not declared war on Ukraine. I think that's just a fundamental understanding people sometimes overlook. This isn't a war. It's a war-like situation. But if this was a war, a genuine war, Kiev wouldn't exist anymore, not as you recognize it. Kiev would be leveled to the ground. The presidential palace would be smoldering ruins. The parliament would be an empty shell. Many of the people who currently occupy those buildings would be dead or driven underground. The people of Kiev wouldn't be able to go shopping. They wouldn't have electricity. They wouldn't have running water. They wouldn't be able to drive, take trains, do anything. Right now in Kiev, they live a normal life. I mean, yeah, it's a life where you have to look over your shoulders. Every once in a while things go boom. So I guess it's not really normal. But the bottom line is people get up and go to work. People take the train. People drive cars. They go to shopping centers. People go to restaurants. People go to parties. They have bars. It's not a city at war in the traditional way. It may soon become a city at war because Russia will retaliate. And when they do so, it'll be done in a manner which is consistent with international law. I mean, Russia's not going to go out there and pound civilian areas, but they're going to hit legitimate command targets, presidency, the Ministry of Defense, the parliament, decision-making centers inside the Ukrainian government where the decisions to do things such as order drones to strike Moscow are made. And we also have to remind ourselves that we're transitioning into the fall and the winter season. There's a premium on energy supplies at a time, electrical generating, equipment, etc. This is all going to be targeted. The Russians are going to take it out. The Ukrainians are going to enter the coldest part of the year with nothing to keep them warm. And they only have their government to blame because their government's the one that thought that they could bring the war to Russia. The war is going to be brought home to Ukraine tenfold.
Yeah. So do you think right now they're trying to use the terror of the drones and these attacks on Moscow, maybe to persuade the people to not back Putin on this war?
The Ukrainians have actually articulated. Mikhail Podolyak, he is a presidential advisor to Zelensky. He has articulated in a very cogent fashion the Ukrainian strategy. On the ground, fighting, they want to get to Melitopol, which is a city in the land bridge connecting Crimea with the rest of Russia. It's about 84 kilometers. Let's give the Ukrainians 2-kilometer credit for what they've done over the course of the past couple months. So we'll call it 82 kilometers away from the front lines. If you take this, you cut off the main north-south highway. Crimea becomes isolated, and any forces in the Melitopol area will be able to bring effective fire down on Crimea, which is something the Ukrainians have said they want to do. That's their goal militarily. They know they're not going to reach this goal and objective, because if they do that, they can declare military victory at that point in time. It would be a significant military victory for them, but they're not going to do that. What they want to do is threaten that, thereby getting the people of Crimea to be concerned. What happens if they take Melitopol? You engender a little bit of concern there. And you also engender concern in Moscow and St. Petersburg and other Russian cities. And then what they want is to achieve some sort of intermediate objective. They'd like to be able to get to that first line of defense. They'd like to be able to breach that first line of defense. They'd like to be able to grab some territory and hold on to it. And what that does is it gives the Russians a bloody nose at a time when the Russians have said no more bloody noses, meaning the Russians mobilized 300,000 troops. They have 150 to 180,000 volunteers. They have the biggest army that they've ever had in the region, the best equipped army. They've had months to prepare this defense, and suddenly, bam, the Ukrainians reach out, punch them in the nose, and they're sitting there with a broken nose and bleeding. They haven't lost the fight, but everybody's shocked. It's like Mike Tyson going into the ring, and in the first 30 seconds, somebody hitting him in the face and putting him down. Tyson gets up. He still has fight, but the whole crowd is now going, whoa, what just happened? And so that's what the Ukrainians want to achieve there. And then they want to tie on to that these deep strikes, which, as I said earlier, have no real military purpose, but they're designed to engender doubt, engender fear, engender terror in the hearts and minds of the Russian people. The goal then, therefore, is to get people to say, we need to stop this war, to lose faith in the leadership of Vladimir Putin, and to carry out what they call the Moscow Maidan, the Maidan being the square in Kiev where in February 2014, the Ukrainian nationalists were able to gather and through use of violence overthrow the constitutionally elected government of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, replacing him with the nationalist government that in various iterations continues to rule to this day. The Ukrainian objective is a Moscow Maidan, Manege Square, to get Russians to rally there and